No.
Mom, mom, mom.
Muting my phone currently.
Me
No one
too.
ever calls. No one ever calls. It'll be my luck.
Pigment International offers some distinctive items for the artful giver. Get the second issue of our Ozzy-nominated Pigment magazine featuring cover art by world-renowned artist Deborah Roberts. This issue dedicated to Black women artists features profiles of Roberts, Smella Lewis, and Harmonia Rosales. We've sought to capture this unique moment in our history from the perspectives of artists and learn what and how they are creating today in our piece, Capturing a Moment in Time. And as always, we have stories on the collectors, art influencers, and of course, beautiful art. Don't miss it. Special offer, get our newest issue and our premiere issue for $30 or buy our new issue for $25. Are you a pin collector? Well, here are 3 that every art lover should have in their collection. Black Fine Art Month, Till Death We Do Art, and our newest pin, Infinite Titan. We've been holding the world together as of late, and this pin shows it. Want other unique art-focused items? Then visit our website, shoppigmentinternational.com, where the artful giver goes.
Good evening. My name is Patricia Andrews Keenan, and I'm one of the co-founders of Pigment International. Pigment International does these select salon talks where we talk to artists, collectors, curators, and others in the art world, and we welcome you to our Black History Month event. This salon talk takes us into another realm of Black art history that Pigment International thought was appropriate for Black History Month. We speak a lot about the Black aesthetic and arts movements tied to social change. There, of course, is AfriCOBRA and the Black arts movement called BAM, which emanated from Chicago, the Black Emergency Coalition, Cultural Coalition that was in New York, and many others. Most made some type of political statement as part of their art. Yet in the end, art for art's sake does not feed an artist. Art is, after all, a business, and many of our greatest Black artists never lived to see their work gain commercial appeal that could put them and their families on sound financial footing. The Florida Highwaymen took a different tact. Their chief salesperson, Harold Newton, took guidance from the white artist mentor, Harold Backus, and from him he learned that Florida landscapes were coveted. Backus's work commanded as much as $500 a piece. The group set out to produce their own landscape at prices just 1/10 of that, but they did it in numbers and quantities large enough to provide them a living outside of the picking and planting that was the norm for African Americans in the 50s. Everything you likely remember from the history books was at play during this time. Jim Crow, Brown v. Board, the Montgomery bus boycotts, lunch counter integrations, Black migration from the South to the North, and the rise of Dr. Martin Luther King. What the Highwaymen did was a radical act of uplift and Black entrepreneurship that changed the course of their lives, affording them relief from tenant farming, sharecropping, and day labor. What they did may not have been art for art's sake, but it was radical. And as we know from art history, what was worth $50 then commands as much as 6 figures today. The 2 gentlemen that we have for our conversation tonight came to admire the Highwaymen from 2 different vantage points. Dr. Butler is a child of the South who lived through the changes as a Black youth growing up in the South. Tony Hayton, a white Canadian who was in awe of the tenacity and resourcefulness of the Highwaymen, came to be a collector. Both men collect that work, and both men are spreading the words about the Highwaymen accomplishments. Also joining us is Renee Mills, whose mother, Marianne Carroll, was the only female member of the Highwaymen, another radical act that we will look forward to discussing tonight. So let's get started on what's going to be a wonderful conversation. First, I'd like to introduce Vicki Wyman, co-founder Uncharted LLC. She was instrumental in bringing the Highwaymen story to Canada during her husband's tenure as ambassador there during the Obama administration. Her work there as an American cultural envoy in Ottawa led to cross border conversations and programs related to the arts, social innovation, and youth engagement. President and First Lady Michelle Obama were introduced to the work of the Highwaymen through her direct intervention. Vicki will in turn introduce Tony, and she'll tell us a little bit about her work as it relates to the Chicago school children. Vicki, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Patricia, and it's really wonderful to be here tonight with all of you. So let me take a minute and tell you about my dear Canadian friend, Tony Hayton, who I met in 2016 while serving in Canada. Tony is a man who's really enraptured by all forms of art. He graduated with a degree in horticulture in the mid-70s, and his career evolved as an environmentalist and horticultural consultant. So translating to collecting the Florida Highwaymen's work with their idyllic landscapes of endangered Florida wetlands, I think it was an easy jump for Tony. But I think for Tony, the kicker for collecting the Highwaymen was the background story, a story that really overtook him. A story that Patricia just spoke to you about, 26 African-American untrained artists who broke from social stigma of the time by creating art when the constraints of injustice would have them otherwise be doing labor in the fields. The Florida Highwaymen reminded Tony of an esteemed group of Canadian landscape painters called the Canadian Group of Seven. And when he viewed the work, he said, but instead of 7 white guys, like the Group of Seven hanging out and painting the wilds of Canada, it was 26 black guys. Well, actually 25 black guys and 1 lady that you're going to learn a lot more about tonight, hanging out and painting the wilds of Florida. Eventually, Tony collecting became a mission to attempt to spread their unique story across Canada and across the U.S. The way that I met Tony was really wonderful, and was one evening in the National Gallery of Canada. We were hosting a contemporary conversation with Chicago artist Nick Cave. And a friend of Tony's came with a little note and gave it to my husband, Bruce, describing Tony and his collection and how he wanted to use his collection as a tool to really teach Canadians about this incredible American story of entrepreneurship and resiliency and creativity. And Bruce handed the note off to me, and I read Tony's note, and I started doing a little research on the Highwaymen. I thought this is the ideal American story to share with our Canadian friends. And that took us on a great deep friendship and an amazing journey. We were able to launch an exhibition of the Florida Highwaymen in Ottawa at a local museum, inviting hundreds of Canadians into on a cold, wintry February night, not quite as cold and wintry as tonight, it was pretty cold, to view the work. And you'll hopefully have the opportunity to see a little bit of the exhibition viewed possibly later tonight. But that first exhibition brought Marianne Carroll to Ottawa. She spoke at a couple of universities, met Canadian students, met Canadian citizens, and really warmed their hearts with her beautiful Floridian landscapes. And from there, actually, the exhibition traveled throughout Canada. It traveled on to Montreal and to Toronto. So I am just so delighted as a Chicagoan who deeply appreciates and loves art. I'm so delighted to be part of this conversation tonight with Pigment International and be connecting this incredible Canadian collector and man to our conversation tonight. So welcome, Tony, and thanks for the opportunity to introduce my dear friend.
Vicki, that was beautiful. I wish I could live up to that, but that was very sweet of you. Thank you. And thank you all for joining in. And Patricia, thanks for putting this event together. it's a lot of fun during these difficult times to be talking with a group of art lovers, and definitely be bringing the Highwaymen to fore. This is a project that I've been involved with now, the Florida Highwaymen, for over 20 years. And when I first got involved with the Highwaymen, it was more to do with, I was looking for just a piece of representative Florida art, and I was on the internet, and I saw a painting of what they call a Rio Mar scene, which was a beach and a palm tree swaying in the wind, large marshmallow-like clouds, popcorn clouds, and birds flying in the wind, kind of drifting, and the surf crashing. And I thought, that's exactly what I'm looking for. And it said Florida Highwaymen, and I went, well, what the heck is a Florida Highwayman? And then I read the story of these 26 Black artists from one location at one time who were using construction materials to create their art, using wallboard as a canvas and crown molding as frames for the art. Basically, no galleries would accept work from Black artists, so they devised a way of selling their art door to door, person to person, out of the trunks of their cars, any way that they could. At the time, convention would be, as has been said, that these individuals would more likely be doing work in the field and menial work, and have no control over their ultimate destiny. So the art was not only a freedom of expression for them in terms of an artistic escape, but it was also an escape from what society would have laid out for them. So the art was two forms of freedom for these people. So it was a great opportunity. I fell in love. I'm a romantic. I thought that was the most romantic story, and the art was so intriguing, to say the least. I was hooked.
I'm going to now do a little introduction of Dr. Butler so you can know a little bit about him, and then I'll bring the two of you together to get this conversation rolling. So, Dr. Michael Butler is the owner of Griot Gallery in Miami. He is a prolific collector who I met in the Little Haiti neighborhood in Miami during our first trip to Art Basel. The Butler collection, and Dr. Butler looks at this as both a collection and a teaching mechanism. So he runs an academy as well. The Butler collection focuses on African American art, but as he says, not exclusively. He believes that African Americans are recognized for a lot of things, music, dance, and sports, but they are lesser known for their artistic achievements, and that's something that he has been working to change. He thinks that collecting art is a ripe area for exploration, explanation, and presentation. And in 2019, when we were in Florida, I actually purchased from him his own book about the Florida Highwaymen, a catalog that he put together. Dr. Butler collects across a wide scope of things, and I think as you hear from him tonight, you will learn that all these things have meaning to him. They create familiarity with the way he grew up, things in his life, and so when he collects, he really adheres to that idiom, buy what you love. So I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Michael Butler. And Dr. Butler, if you give us a couple of minutes to tee this up, and then I will go into some questions.
Yes, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. It's not often that I get an occasion to talk about my passion for African American art, and I usually try to educate people on what African American art is, or Black art, and sometimes they overthink it, and it is basically art done by Black artists, because too often people who view their art uh, confine their thinking about Black art to they need to have visible Black content, and that's not true. And one of the things that I was drawn to the Highwaymen was because frequently, I don't know of anything, and I'm going to address that to Tony later on in the thing. I don't know of any kind of images where there is visible Black content in the Florida Highwaymen. They would try to, they focused on figurative drawings and landscapes that had, that's an aspect of the personality. That's the worldview that they expressed uh, that I would, I was attracted to. Sometimes we think about the collecting is one of the things that went early on in when I turned from a directing, when it turned from a home decorating project, that's where I started about artwork and African American artwork. And it changed from that because one day my wife looked at me and I was saying that I was talking to someone, and for all the ways that Black women can look at Black men and cut them off in mid sentence, she said, I told somebody, I said, well, no, I don't consider myself an art collector. And she gave me one of the hardest side eyes that you could give somebody, because I could immediately translate her nonverbals, which was like, if you don't consider yourself an art collector, what is all of this stuff that we have at our house? So I eventually came to the realization that I was a collector. And basically, I thought that only people like Oprah or, Bill Cosby, those were people collecting, and I wouldn't have a meaningful collection effort unless I had the resources and wherewithal to get a collection like those celebrities, and I would never approach that. So once I realized that you can have a meaningful collection with art that personally resonates with you, and part of the thing that really resonated with me about the Florida Highwaymen, it's the narrative that through imagination, through improvisation, and invention, they created, they literally, it's an overused kind of cliche term. They really made a way out of no way. They really um, looked around, saw what they had, and they made it what they made, what they needed from what they were given. And that's one of the most interesting stories, that they were recognized as good artists. The the Florida Highwaymen was seen to be one of the last features, the last big art movement of the 20th century in some circumstances. And this was all from these non quote unquote non artists that really were artists, but equally as important for them and what they were trying to do, which is make a better life for themselves and their families and secure material resources. Um, they were they were entrepreneurs, and they
Well,
had a
Dr.
unique.
Butler, let's get into that conversation. We're gonna bring Tony on, and just before we get started, I did want to make mention of the folks that have supported us in this effort tonight. First, New Day Culture, who is our platform provider. Brian is in the back keeping everything on the rails for us. So we thank New Day Culture, he and Kayla, for their support. Also, we have Chicago Gallery News. They've been very supportive in sharing this information, and the Chicago Reader. So I would be remiss in not mentioning them. And we're going to have this conversation for about 10 or 15 minutes. And then we're going to welcome another presenter. We're going to welcome Renee Mills, who is going to talk about her mother, Mary Ann Carroll, who was a member of the Highwaymen and the only female member of the Highwaymen. So she'll be joining us in just a few minutes. So the first question I have for the two of you, any group has someone who's kind of a catalyst that makes things work, that keeps things moving. And I know in this case that there was one of the artists, I believe Harold Newton, who actually went out, learned from a mentor, and kind of brought what he learned back to the group and inspired them. So can you tell me a little bit about how this got started and how that came about? So Tony, if I start with you, and then we'll go to Dr. Butler.
So Harold Newton was a painter in the early 1950s who traveled around Florida, and he was doing paintings on velvet. And one day he ran across uh, Beanie Backus, who was in Fort Pierce. And Beanie Backus was a white artist that was at the time probably the doing the most indicative highwayman, or not highwayman, but Florida landscapes. And Beanie Backus more or less mentored Harold Newton and trained him into producing Florida art as opposed to, say, religious artifacts, which were done on the velvet kind of paper. And so Harold was a very quick study, and he started producing beautiful renditions of Florida landscapes. Basically, Florida at the time was booming after the war. There was highways were being built into the state. The space race had just begun, so people were moving to fill jobs in the space race, as it were, at that time against Russia. Air conditioning for homes had come into its own kind of new age for that period of time. And so there was a boom going on in Florida, and young families moving in, and they were buying properties. And the art that, first of all, Harold was producing, so he met Backus around 1954, but Harold was more of a loner, although Renee will be on later, Mary Ann's daughter, and she'll probably talk about Harold Newton and his influence on her mom. But the gentleman that also met Backus was a young student in high school in Fort Pierce, and he learned from Backus also certain rudimentary necessities of creating art. But Alfred Hair was able to see a different landscape than what Harold Newton was producing, and he started to paint paintings quickly on inexpensive materials. So he was trying to provide art that was inexpensive and accessible monetarily to these young families and businesses that were coming into Florida as Florida was booming that way. And he was producing kind of iconic, easy to like landscapes. Some people might even say that use the term motel art, but his idea was in a short period, relatively inexpensive prices, and he was a very kind of not only a creative man, but he was also one that attracted others to his outgoing, vibrant personality. He was easy to like, and he soon had a number of friends that were seeing what he was doing with the art and being successful, and he more or less mentored them into producing paintings a lot similar to what he was doing. So those are
Yes.
probably
And
the two most important individuals in the Highwaymen initiative. And from there, from those two, they are the ones that garnered the more individuals into the group.
I want to bring Dr. Butler in because Dr. Butler actually did the article that's in our Pigment magazine right now. And I remember you had a way that you described Alfred Hair. You said he liked certain things and he was a certain kind of guy. So I wanted you to share that with the group.
Well, Alfred wanted material success, and he would do, um, not whatever it took, but he had a strategy that he would pursue that he like made a way out of no way. He had a vision that if he could do art, and then he would not do it in a way that Bacchus would do it. He was he imagined it in a way that fit his needs and his circumstances, and that's one of the things that I really appreciate about this group. They would not, for lack of a better word, they were not imitative or derivative. I mean, they reflected the Florida landscape, and I would think, like for what Tony was saying, um, they made, I would not call it motel art, but I would call it souvenir art. That they would make souvenir art that people would capture uh, a moment in time, a memory, what have you, and they could take it back with them and forever reflect, like immediately go to that space where they could relive the moment. And so I would think of it as souvenir art. But they really, the imagination led to innovation, led to an invention that you can contrast what Bacchus did compared to the Highwaymen. They were both doing Florida landscapes. They both tried to get, Bacchus was more naturalistic and basically trying to recreate specific things in the Florida landscape. The Florida Highwaymen, they were basically dealing with memory and impression. The gallery, the sales part of it is he had a gallery. They did not. They came up with the idea like we will travel to businesses and sell our art door to door. Uh, they could not command the prices that Bacchus could command, so they would make it accessible, and like the people can, like they decided the public, like it was in their reach for almost any person. Um, they worked as a group. Bacchus worked, so singly and and as a solo artist. They were fast. Bacchus would, they would make 15 to 20 paintings in a day, and Bacchus would make one, if that, in a day. So the process, they evolved the process and they evolved the technique, and they had a specific marketing and sales approach that they adapted. They took from Bacchus, they learned what he did, and then they refashioned it in a way that they could meet their own goals.
Bacchus was an interesting character in himself. From what I read, he was a little bit bohemian. Black, white, it didn't really matter to him. He kind of welcomed everybody into his home. He would teach and he would share. What I'd like to do now is have some photos come up of some of the work, because I think that's the most important thing, to see that. And then maybe we can go back and forth between the two of you, and you can tell us a little bit about some of your favorite work. So I'm going to ask Brian to do that. Tony, you want to tell us about this piece?
This is an early Harold Newton piece. So what you might notice about it is that, to me, this is a very impressionistic piece of art, in that there's not a lot of definition going on. There's bold brush strokes in the palm trees. It's a very kind of avant-garde look. Uh, Again, like a lot of the early paintings, this could be Florida today if you're lucky to find a spot like this around all the concrete. But this is definitely a scene of Florida, say 1,000 or 2,000 years ago. But what I like about it is the impressionistic feel of this painting. And I think what happens as we move into the other paintings that we'll see is that, I'm calling the Highwaymen, really, they're impressionistic painters, because they all evolved their own style after working out of a kind of a set plan or mold that they would work. After a while, they became much more individually creative, which is one of the great things about their work.
Okay.
Okay.
Brian, would you keep going? We'll show the next one.
So Harold, the first painting was Harold. This is by Roy R.A. Mcclendon. So he's now 89 years old. He's still alive. Harold, the first artist, died 27 years ago. So Mcclendon here, Roy Mcclendon, was the second artist to join into or become part of what we call the group. And this is a savanna scene. You notice the birds are a little bit out of size for the rest of the picture, but this is what we call a fire sky painting with a lone stand of pine in the middle. So this would be very indicative of one of the scenes that highwaymen would use, this evening sunset or early morning sunrise scene. So again, it doesn't show any signs of people or man anywhere. It's beautiful.
And we'll go to the next shot.
Okay, so now we're dealing with Alfred Hair. So Alfred Hair was the gentleman that was kind of the catalyst of the group, the one that brought everybody together and motivated them. And this particular painting, probably era about 1963, so an earlier painting. Poor Alfred died in 1970, so his works were probably between 1960 and 1970. This is what we call a Royal Poinciana tree, which is one of the prime scenes for highwayman paintings, or basically one of the basic scenes that they do. So an early work by Alfred Hair, a Royal Poinciana tree. Okay,
And we'll
Brian.
do a couple more. There we go.
Okay, so this is a really intriguing painting by James Gibson. Okay, I call it the double palms, and again, this is one of Gibson's early 1960s works. He was the fourth member of the group, a little bit older than Alfred. James, a true gentleman. Sadly, he passed away in 2017. This particular painting has what we call fast grass in the foreground, and if you'll notice, the outline of the tree branches at the top and the fast grass at the bottom create one of the concepts that the highwaymen were using to frame their art, known as the reverse C. So if you see that the greenery at the top and the side and the bottom is in fact a reverse C. So again, this is what we would call a fast painting, because James Gibson wouldn't have spent a lot of time, and quite awe-inspiring in its own way. Brian, have we got another one? Okay, this is a good friend of of James Gibson and Alfred Hair, more probably a friend of Alfred Hair by the name of Livingston, quote unquote, Castro Roberts. This, again, a very impressionistic look featuring the stand of two pine trees in the middle of a savanna, two egrets kind of waiting, doing fishing or thinking about fishing, perhaps. A beautiful pink sky. It's such a peaceful painting. You'd really like to spend at least an afternoon there doing absolutely nothing if you could. And the colors are just gorgeous. A painting probably about 1965 or so. That this particular piece has a great big warp in it, so it's at least it looks flat on this screen. But anyway, a beautiful painting by Livingston Roberts. Sadly, he's passed away. Damn.
I wanted to ask Dr. Butler too, if you could kind of chime in, I know, and tell the audience a little bit about what the highwaymen would paint on, what kind of paint they used, because I know that impacts the value of the painting. So I was hoping you could share a little bit about that, and then we'll move on to the next part of the conversation.
Yeah, I mean the thing about it is that's kind of when you contrast Bacchus's style canvases, and they did ups and boards. I mean uh, that was a cheaper material. They could not. They would use the ups and boards um, to make their images on it. They would frame it. Bacchus would use traditional framing. They would use the crown molding from kind of discards from construction and all of that they would use for the frames. And again, they wanted to have the package that once they completed one, well, Al Black would say like uh, in the with the work that they did, it was not complete till it was sold. And by framing them with crown molding, by using the boards, it was basically could stack so they could be easily transported because canvases are like a little temperamental and they would get damaged en route if that was the tack that they would take. Um, so they really wanted to make a product that was accessible to people because it was priced right.
Thank you. Now, for this next part of the conversation, we're going to introduce Renee Mills. Renee is the daughter of Mary Ann Carroll, the only female highwayman. So I'd like to ask Brian a little bit about herself and tell us about her mother. But first, we're going to run a little video that shows a little bit about her mom and about the highwaymen. So we're going to run the video and then we're going to welcome Renee.
I was what you might call a tomboy, and I could fist fight, I could wrestle, and you had to be a sure enough a good man to throw me. And if you didn't mess around, I'd whoop you. Most ladies like to fix up their hair, rouge up their mouth, and powder up their face, and fix their fingernails, and that's all right with them, but I try and look at things a little bit different from other people.
All my life, all our lives, she's always painted. They started painting these paintings in the early 50s. These paintings are the history.
A lot of people then didn't respect us.
People didn't feel like a black person could come up with nothing look that good.
A lot of time you have a gem and other people will tell you that it's just a stone or a pebble.
The same paintings that I was selling back in the days for $40, I seen sold for 10 and 20,000.
I either stand up or fall down, and I've always been determined to stand. And I feel like a situation is no rougher than you let it get in your mind. So this was nothing different, it was a challenge, you know? And I've always felt like I could win. And I did. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Yes. Glory.
I'll give you a little bit of history about Renee. She has served as a PR assistant to her mother. We lost her mother just last year, I believe it was, and she'll tell you a little bit more about that. But Renee spends her time activating and advocating for the arts and literacy. She's a former adjunct and education administrator and currently a writer, researcher, and business consultant. Please welcome Renee Mills.
Thank you so much, Ms. Patricia. It's such an honor to sit amongst all of you amazing people who saw the value in what was just merely earning a living. Mother caught on about 16. Harold Newton was her mentor. And if you've got a chance to meet her, and as indicated in the video, she's a character. She was like, I like that. So she continued to paint. She had always drawn since she was a small child. But to say a little bit about her, mother had come from uneducated maternal family, and education and strength were very important. Integrity, not just being physically strong, but strong in the mind. So I found out she got her GED later in life. The whole time she was a very educated, respected woman in the community. And she wore many hats from circa 1958 when she really started painting full time, all the way up until her death. Activist, educator, and so forth. So when I pursued my doctorate, it was to give credibility to research and work behind her. So I asked her permission to drop my name, Wanda. Every word this woman put into our lives had meaning, edification. Wanda means wanderer, which apropos, she named me that. So I was not allowed to drop Wanda. So it's Dr. Wanda Renee Mills, for those of you who are joining us on Facebook and through the live cam. Thank you for your donations to this amazing organization. I'm thrilled to be here. But back to Mother. She opened an art gallery. It was an art gallery and a studio in the early 70s. She painted. We had a production assembly in the back where the boys did the frames. Then later on, I framed throughout my life, but we were framing from 1974 on till I went off in the Navy in 1987, I think. But I've still framed for her after that. But the children, we were the assembly line. We shellacked the Epsom boards. She cut them because they're very hard to cut. And she only trusted my oldest brother and herself with the single blade razor. But even when she closed down the gallery and the assembly went to the house, we would prep the driveway and put the assembly line out there. So painting was always in our lives. It was never an option. It paid the bills. More so importantly, she was not this broke down person that people try to portray these artists to be if you follow anything out there in the writings. So my mother's incredibility is my chief concern, paramount. The 50s, the 60s and the 70s, she provided us a great home. She bought her homes. She bought property. She liked her fancy Lincoln. It was very important to not only look good, but to be smart, be strong, be consistent. And so Yes, she would pull up with a Lincoln, and all her suits were sewn by her or sewn by later. She hired a seamstress. But when she pulled up, she commanded respect. There's a story behind her carrying the 38 on her ankle or in her pocket for many years for protection. But mother was a good girl. She was a very strong, noble, wise person and compassionate. So throughout the years, the art did not slow down to about 1982. There was a little crash. And then so she had to kind of curtail painting the pictures to painting the trend of Roman letters onto people's homes. And so, of course, that led to painting just flat walls into people's homes and laying the sheetrock and so forth, the other trades. But the significance of her art is that she never stopped. People would request or commission Black Jesuses, which she's done a few of those, and there are only a handful done in her lifetime. Um, the Jordan River, which she painted in our church on the entire back wall. Sadly, the people were not educated enough to understand art and painted over that beautiful picture. She painted that in 1979. I remember walking home, seeing it every day, like, oh my God, this is so embarrassing. What is she doing now? We lived on the corner. So um, she was a card, but consistent. So again, the painting took its, it survived the curves and the trends, and ultimately, when I got out of the military in 1994, she opened another gallery and I helped run that. That was one of the pictures you saw there in that building. Um, I worked for her part-time, keeping it open because she was always on the go, painting here and there. And around 1994, thanks to Jim Fitch, he actually coined the term highwayman, and that gave it life. And for people like Tony and Vicky and Dr. Butler here, everybody has taken an interest and kept the momentum of the story going. It is totally important for our youth to understand that you can follow your dream, which is what Mother always taught us. Um, Keep God first, and definitely education. When I got my doctorate, I wasn't sure. I just did it because it was the thing to do for my career. But I did it in literacy. And the reason why is I understood her mother never learned to read. She also reminded us that many a times Black people were shorted because people just assumed they couldn't read. So reading was super, super, super important in her life. So art keeps you happy. 2, she was painting what God had given us as a paradise here, an oasis here in Florida. And people will never see that again, thanks to commercialism, it had to exist. But those were real images that I saw riding in the car with her. Mr. Newton's picture that Tony posted earlier with that bursting sun coming through the orange sky. Well, if you've ever driven to Okeechobee in those days, you would see that setting. We've parked along the river. There were times she was hurt. She opened her Bible and she would paint or sketch whatever she saw there. And she would read her Bible. And that's where she got a lot of her images from and a lot of her spirit from. There's so many layers of her that I would love to share. But more importantly, the paintings, the frames, we did all of that. I actually helped her frame here a few years back. We got to frame together in the garage. It was quite an experience. I've gone into some old homes in recent years to research, trying to find this Upsom board because I remember it quite well. The smaller children, my sister and I, we shellacked it and put it over so she could prep it to tap it onto the self-made easel on the house. Yes, it was tapped onto the outside of our house. Another thing that as kids we thought was so embarrassing. But it has always been a part of my life and it just will never leave me. I had the honor of meeting Mr. Hair. He had bought the house three houses down on Dunbar, where Dunbar took a curve. And if you ever got to go in this house, it had all this black, dark paintings. I'm like, my God, did he worship the devil? But it was beautiful if you understood art, but it was very dark. And the woman who bought that house, fortunately, she procrastinated about decorating. So there was a long history of capturing and seeing that art over and over and better understanding Mr. Hair before he left us. Mr. Gibson, his parents lived across the street, so he often would come there and paint for them. So we had the pleasure of watching him work. But again, she never devalued the gift of having Mr. Newton, Mr. Harold Newton, what a rebel, teach her how to paint. She was still grateful. More importantly, she'll always love Mr. Blood for not wanting to paint and wanting to sell. Nobody really wanted to sell but him. Um, it takes a few dog stories to get to that one. But I do want to go on the record and correcting one thing. They were called hotel art. As much as the artists were forced to sell out of their cars, the reason hotel became a thing because it was easier to walk into the lobby. The motels were seedy. You did not want to go into a Florida motel, especially if you cared about your reputation or character. They went into hotels. Fortunately, the hotel managers took a chance, threw a couple of 25, $50 at them, and hung the paintings up. So there are about 2 places right here in Central Florida that actually still has the paintings hanging up. So again,
Wow.
there are just so many layers. And this
Well,
woman,
Renee, oh, I'm sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. Renee, I thought it would be great for us to see some of the pictures, and I'd like to bring Vicky back into the conversation as well because were from your mother's trip to Canada when they exhibited her work. So I think Brian is going to bring those up, and then between the two of you, I'd like to get both of you on screen, and you can tell us a little bit about these pictures. And Brian, if you can click through.
oh wow. So that was in the back in her studio on 25th Street. The record shop was in the front and her paint setup was in the back. And she's in one of her famous brown suits and her brown turtleneck sweater. And yeah, she recaptured that painting about 3 more times after that. But yeah, that was in her studio, in her gallery.
Okay, and if we keep going.
Mother and I were doing a show at Safety Harbor. Actually, that suit, I bought it when I went to Bethune-Cookman. She asked for it. I said, Mother, you can't wear my clothes. And she said, Turkey, give it to me. So that top, she wore it. It's hanging up upstairs. She wore it till she died. So I'm honored that shirt stood the test of time. But we did this Safety Harbor show every year. And she wanted to capture some scenery. That particular picture was done in a different place, but in the same time frame. We were just coming off of the Safety Harbor shows. I think we started those in
Okay.
2004.
All right, and the next one. And Vicky, if you could tell us a little bit about this event. I think
Sure.
your microphone is on, so you could share with us.
Wonderful. So this was opening night for the Highwaymen exhibition in an extraordinary gallery in Ottawa. The exhibition was really curated with Tony and a wonderful curator locally who lived there named Guy Birubay. And you can see it was a cold, wintry night, as I mentioned, but yet there was this warmth inside this lower level of the gallery. All of the artists that were represented, you can see their names listed on the entrance, the gilt entrance. And what was so wonderful about the exhibition was that we had a local artist, and Tony, you can speak more to this, a local Ottawa artist who actually painted beautiful portraits of each individual highwayman and highwaywoman that accompanied the art. And they were also done on these kind of pendant gilt backgrounds. So there was a large, in the back, you can see just a glimpse of it, a large projection of contemporary Florida landscape, and then all the landscape paintings that surrounded. And in the back of the space was a room where we had a conversation. You'll see more of those photos where Marianne spoke to the group of people that were visiting the exhibition. And I had the opportunity to interview her. And then I said later that evening, a band broke out and it turned into a dance party. So it was a full-on experience, a pretty wonderful one.
Beautiful. And he's going to go to the next photo for us.
Gosh, Tony, you could probably speak to this. It's pretty special, obviously, Marianne and Michelle Obama. And I believe Tony was not me, but Tony was the one who accompanied Marianne to meet Mrs. Obama. I don't know if he's still on. You can hear his voice, but Tony, you probably could speak to this, or Renee, about that experience.
Renee, you want to kind of chime in about what your mother thought about that opportunity?
Mother, she felt proud. Honestly, she felt that the presidency was such a noble position. She was like, just to think, she was a fifth grader and she never forgot her DC field trip as a patrolman. And so when she got back, she says, I finally got to see the White House again, So, and I said, Mother, tell me about the first lady. Like, she's like, oh, she was super nice, mannerable, smart cookie. She loved her. She thought she was super warm, super genuine. And just humble. She thought the first lady was very humble. Said, some people get kind of snooty when they get there, but she was super kind and warm. And she loved the trip. She didn't want to brag too much. Not everyone's happy for you, but she was super stoked. And definitely I have to give Tony and I guess Vicki the credit for that, because I had to sit that one out. That was awesome.
And if we would show a couple more photos, I think there are about 3 more we can show. I love this. So this is the
these
work
are
that you
beautiful
were talking
portraits.
about, Vicki.
Yes, done by the local artist. And Tony is going to refresh my memory and give me his name when he gets when he gets back on. But he was commissioned to do these works, and it was such a beautiful compliment to the exhibition, because I think he really captured the beauty and the life of each of these individuals, and you really could sense that they were there in the room with you. And unfortunately, many of them had passed on. At the time we did this exhibition, I think there maybe were 6 highwaymen living, including Marianne. And now I guess I'm not sure how many are currently living. Maybe just a couple remain. Renee, do you know?
Just a few. The Mcclendons are still alive. Both Newtons are dead. Let me see. Mr. Knight, Mr. Lewis, Blood Black. He spoke at her funeral. He's just so warm. We'll always love him. So they're about, I want to say 10. I had the names because, there are 26 coined into the Florida Highway Museum Fame of Art. And of them, I had to keep a list because they were dying fast. I remember where we were when when Castro passed, and I had the pleasure of attending Mr. Gibson's funeral. So it started to get kind of bleak there, but yeah, there are quite a few left.
Yeah. So that was
Well,
really.
thank you. Oh, go ahead, Vicki.
No, I was just going to say that that Marianne really just lit up the space, and she brought such a great, rich story to the community, and I think it was just so inspiring with the way in which she was so entrepreneurial and innovative and creative and resilient. And it was not just beautiful work, which is extraordinarily beautiful, as you can see, but the way in which she lived her life and the intentions that she set for her life, and personally and for her family, as just a role model for so many people. And I think that you saw that across the board with the highwaymen generally. I mean, their life, it was a very tough adversarial environment, and they were so resourceful to figure out a way to make a living and to use art as a springboard, and also to tell their story through that art. So she was probably one of the most extraordinary communicators, really, that I'd ever met. And it was, a beautiful, beautiful legacy. So I hope we just keep telling the story.
Absolutely. Brian, if we could bring Tony and Dr. Butler back, and I want to please send those, but I have a couple of things I think people would be interested in. And the first, Dr. Butler, I'll kind of point to you. So if I was looking for a Florida Highwayman work today, what would I do? How might I go satisfy that craving? And I think Renee, you might have something to share as well. But I'll start with Dr. Butler and tell me, what kind of pricing am I looking for if I want to buy this work today?
Well, unfortunately, it's going up all the time. So generally, I participate in auctions, and that's where I got pretty much all of mine from. I don't necessarily have, for some art that I get, I have a sort of inside track to a broker or a dealer for that, and I would not be averse to getting an inside track on this. But one of the things, Renee, I wanted to tell you, I really would have liked to meet your mother. I mean, she would have gotten along with my father, because I think they would have been subscribed to the notion that one of my daddy's two things that I remember talking to, he always said, let that be a lesson to you. And I'm sure that that's one of the things that, even though if your mother did not say that, she thought that. And then an emphasis on education, that was never wasted. And the more you know, the more you can get out of life, and the more you can kind of guard and be ready for whatever comes next. And then the other thing is, I think one of the things that I kind of live my life by, Daddy would always say, Black people will never progress if every generation has to start from zero. And I know from your telling of your mother's story, intergenerational progress was something that she very much believed in, as opposed to like her mother didn't have to read, didn't, wasn't able to read. And then she made sure that she got her education, and then she made sure that you got a doctorate. So I'm you know, I'm very, I'm honored to have listened to your mother's story.
And Renee, I believe you're the executor of your mother's estate, and you've been doing different things there. Could you share that with the audience?
I want to say thanks to Vicki really quick because those pictures, when they were at the Daniel Spector Museum, Mother and I, she asked me to take a picture of everyone with my camera. So we were tell that artist, wow, thank you, Tony, and thank you for the kind words. Dr. Butler, resonating more than you know, and thank you for understanding the struggle. God bless you. So the paintings, won't let mine out of the house anymore. Like I said, her paintings are significant, were the most stolen. So I just can't afford that luxury. I bought 2 paintings every year wholesale because I was trying to build a collection. But at the same time, I guess I just did not understand my hero, this immortal person, would ever leave me. So I bought 2 paintings a year thinking I would have time to catch up and, stockpile a nice collection from all the artists. But each year I donated to universities. I donated to a few of the elementary schools here, Cornell University, Syracuse, Bethune-Cookman. Through the STEM program that we facilitated with NASCAR, I donated one to Clemson and Delaware State. So most of my paintings I had donated. Hindsight 2020, I'll have to, like Dr. Butler say, command a broker, or I have to use some of her old phone numbers that she used to have me call. That's another story. But the paintings have significantly gone up, and people are now better understanding what they have. So people are searching their garages and attics. So I have to truly thank Tony for his instrumentation in a lot of this.
Oh, thank you, Renee, for sharing. And Tony, I did not get to tell the audience that Dr. Butler and I knew each other, and he wrote the article. And keep in mind, you can still get the magazine and read the entirety of Dr. Butler's article. For those who register for tonight, you will get a magazine. But Tony actually came to me through LinkedIn. And I just thought it was such serendipity. We had just put the magazine to bed, we were mailing it out, and I get a message on LinkedIn, have you ever heard about the Highwaymen? So I wanted to kind of give you the last word because your outreach helped to facilitate this conversation. And I know you think a lot about, the place this fits in civil rights, in Black history. And I wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of share that with the group, your thoughts before we.
Well, that's really sweet, Patricia. Thanks. Yeah, there's a lot to say. I guess I want to just mention one thing that when Renee's mom was in Ottawa, and Vicki will remember this, she used to say the sweetest little thing that's such a good story for everybody. It's something to live by because she told us proverbs all the times. And she said, a quitter never wins and a winner never quits. So I think that is kind of a mantra from Marianne for everybody, really. She was a wise lady. So, what I'd like to say at the end is that I stopped buying the art about 20 years ago because I been involved in this, and I thought, nobody's telling this story in the United States. Nobody outside of Florida knows about this art and these artists. So that was when I took the collection that I had up to Washington, and I started lending it out. Actually, Renee's mom came up to Howard University and we did an exhibit there. So the collection that I have is for the edification of the populace of the United States, to learn about the Highwaymen. It's available. If you go online, it's simple to find the website for the art. It's Florida Highwaymen exhibit, that's all one word, .com. We've got a number of paintings, Highwaymen paintings, a lot of vintage paintings. We'd love to share it with museums and galleries to help spread this story about this great group of artists that are underappreciated and little known across the United States. These great African-American artists who talk about, their story talks about the American dream. It talks about civil rights. It talks about entrepreneurship. Can't say that word right. It talks about environmental protection. It talks about freedom and happiness and pursuing your dreams. And so I just think the Highwayman story is one that has to be shared and told by people who appreciate art. It's very accessible for everybody. I love it. Thank you very much for this opportunity, Patricia.
So Michael, Vicki, Renee, Tony, we cannot thank you enough for sharing this. It was so perfect for this time, for Black History Month, and we look forward to being a part of things with you in the future too. So thank you so much for participating tonight. I want to thank everyone for tuning in. We hope that you will learn more about Pigment International. We are also the founders of Black Fine Art Month, a celebration that we found did not exist, and we thought it appropriate. So in 2019, we first celebrated Black Fine Art Month in October, and we did a series of talks like this one. So please be on the lookout for that. Follow us on social media, and we look forward to being again with you shortly. Thank you so much, and thanks for joining us tonight.
Pigment International offers some distinctive items for the artful giver. Get the second issue of our Ozzy-nominated Pigment magazine featuring cover art by world-renowned artist Deborah Roberts. This issue dedicated to Black women artists features profiles of Roberts, Smella Lewis, and Harmonia Rosales. We've sought to capture this unique moment in our history from the perspectives of artists and learn what and how they are creating today in our piece, Capturing a Moment in Time. And as always, we have stories on the collectors, art influencers, and of course, beautiful art. Don't miss it. Special offer, get our newest issue and our premiere issue for $30 or buy our new issue for $25. Are you a pin collector? Well, here are 3 that every art lover should have in their collection. Black Fine Art Month, Till Death We Do Art, and our newest pin, Infinite Titan. We've been holding the world together as of late, and this pin shows it. Want other unique art-focused items? Then visit our website, shoppigmentinternational.com, where the artful giver goes.